Okay, so continuing with the pencil tool and the smooth tool. Remember, you have to see the anchors before you can modify them. So I'm using the small selection tool for that. And I have my pencil tool set to really smooth, because mostly what I need to do is modify some of these sharp edges. Kind of average them out. It's always good to zoom in and out and see if what you're doing is effective and readable. So far, so good. Little improvements. Not everything needs to be smoothed. You know, you want some variety in your type design too. So where I think a hard edge is effective, gives some power and a jolt to the design, I'm going to leave it in. Just like your spot illustrations, you want your type to engage the viewer. The more they look at it, the more they can appreciate what goes into it. Like that sharp point, I like that. I might even echo it there. The belly of the letters, you get into type design, has to do with the swells and the curves that they use and what you want to emphasize, the concaves, and then the curves, the counter curves. These are the things type designers pay attention to. So it moves the eye effortlessly and dynamically. Usually to the right. So you can build in your own tilts and italics, all by modifying your vectors. If you think of kind of the most famous logo types, ones like Coca-Cola, they spend a lot of time adjusting those curves to complement each other in the original design, and then every time they redesign it and put it onto a new can, a new ad, a new context. Paying attention to those curves and concaves, counter curves. All right, so that's pretty complicated type. And it was created in Photoshop just using layer styles. And you could do something similar in Illustrator, and I'll show you, because this is what's called an interior outline, which sounds like a contradiction. So I'm going to save the work, and I will demonstrate on the type that I brought in before how this can be done. So let me turn these off. So if I wanted to create an outline, I have to do it in a few steps in Illustrator, especially if it was made from the type tool. Remember, the type tool is just solid black shapes, but I have converted them to vectors. Once I've converted them as fill paths into Illustrator, I can select them all, and I can add a stroke, either up here or down here. So I'm going to give them a white stroke. Strokes are different in Illustrator than they are as a layer style in Photoshop. In Photoshop, you can decide that the stroke is on the outside, on the inside, or splits the difference between the center. In Illustrator, it's always going to split the difference because it's using the same path that creates your fill in order to dictate the stroke. But you can set it to be tapered or wavy or limited, right? And I think that can look good, but you can't control where it gets thick and thin necessarily. You can also try different brushes. Like calligraphic stroke brushes. So instead of it just using a circle to make a basic line, you can say, well, give me an oval, and it will make a different kind of line that even uniform might be a little bit more interesting. Now, I want to turn that stroke into its own fill path. So what I do is I select it, and then I say Object, Path, Outline Stroke. And now those white shapes are also their own fill path, which is confusing. But I can show you that by simply moving and separating that new fill path from the fill behind it. So I've created two fill path vectors out of one, which is very, very handy, especially for some nice kind of offset type effects. And then to create the interior outline, I create another stroke around the white. So how do I do that? I add a stroke now, but this time it's going to be a black stroke. So I'm going to fill that with black. And my fill should still be white. I'm not sure why it's showing black. And then I'm going to outline that stroke. So make sure it's selected in your layers. This is just to show you that such things are possible, right? I'll isolate it just to this example. So I say Object, Path, Outline, Stroke. And now I have multiple things I can select and play with. Oh, it's because my stroke was so thick. That's why it looked all black. Okay, so let me go back a few steps. And let me adjust that stroke size to, let's say, 0.3. Okay, so now you can see the black outline stroke. I'll do 0.5 around the white shapes. Now be careful what happens at corners. This is why I always like to outline strokes so I can control those things, because if you keep them at strokes, you can't. And then I'm going to outline those strokes, path, outline, stroke. And now I've got all these different elements that I can use, right? So even though I have black type, I have a white stroke outline with a black stroke outline around that, and that's called an interior outline. And they are all a vector, which is very, very handy. Okay, so that is what I saved time by just live tracing how I had created it in Photoshop. And in Photoshop, I just used the layer styles for stroke. Okay, is there anything else that needs to be cleaned up? Well, these pretty simple compared to the rest. Forms for just the black letters, just simple black letters. Select them, round them out. I want to finish this pretty quickly so we can get to coloring and backgrounds and putting it all together in Photoshop. But I need a black shape EPS first out of Illustrator. Here's a tangency, a touching that I don't want, and to break it, I need to use my eraser and separate it. First, I have to select it. And then once I've broken them with the eraser, then I can redraw those edges with the pencil tool. I actually like the hard edge on the interior curve of that S, but I might widen this one up a bit. Type is subjective. Okay, welcome to the nest. It's readable, it's cleaned. I want to look at my little feather outlines. It's all of these things can be adjusted. Both the interior shapes and the exterior. Always play with the inside and the outside of the line. In traditional analog type design, you do that with black and white paint on a hot press board. You usually ink your type with a brush, and then you use basically whiteout paint. It's called graphic white, to clean it up and erase. And then if you need to add back, you use graphic black. And just trying to smooth both sides of the line until the type is just what you want. Illustrator makes that a lot more user-friendly. So type design is definitely improved with digital tools. All right, now once you have that, make sure you don't have any strokes. So you can select the whole thing and then just make sure that your stroke is turned off, right? If there are strokes anywhere in it, it's going to be a nightmare to use as a poster. And if there are any strokes, you just go up to Object, Path, Outline Strokes, so that you can adjust them as you need. Now you're going to save it. And I always suggest saving as an EPS file that's transferable between Photoshop and Illustrator. Just like we did with your logos, just like we did with your line art for your spot illustrations. So you go to File, Save As. Come on. And it'll take that beautiful type that you designed that has no white shapes in it. It's all just black shapes. Any day now. And it will save it as an EPS. There we go. I'm going to rename it as black. I want to make sure you name it so you can find it. So this is my Karl Assignment 6 title flag black type as an EPS. You let the computer fill in that format tag at the end. You don't type it in yourself. That lets the computer know how to open it. So there it is. Beautiful. I have it saved twice. So now I'm going to go back to assignment 5, where I colored my spot illustration. And I'm going to open up my PSD file. Remember, my PSD file took my EPS vector line art and then colored behind it, and even on top of it within Photoshop using digital coloring, with flat color, with duotone color, with color holds, with special effects, like a sandwich, right? The white bread on the bottom, the black line art at the top, and then color holds and special effects being like an olive over the top. Now I'm going to go to image canvas size. This was 8 by 10. That's how we colored our spot illustrations. I want to give a lot of space now for my poster design, whether you're doing a square, whatever you're doing. So I'm going to do a poster design for this